Hello and welcome to the Good Leader podcast. I'm Will van der Hart.
And I'm Will James.
And we are delighted that you've joined us today because we're going to be talking to Troy Miller, who is a recipient of an Ivor Novello award. He's also been Grammy nominated 3 times, and he's had his finger in an awful lot of musical pies, which we're going to explore a little bit today, but particularly interested in this idea again of how can we lead better. And we're so grateful to you, Troy, for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, and like Will says, we're so interested about this question about how can we lead better. And the thought comes to me, you know, you've been working in these creative environments for a long time and you've thrived in the big scheme of things. And I wonder if you can think of a point of that you've been really proud of over your career so far, and kind of why. Like, what were the secret ingredients that made that so important for you?
Oh,
it's probably quite a lot of
question. Yeah,
exactly. 30-year music career, but
well, I love music, you know, and I suppose if I can say I'm proud of anything, it's that I've stuck with it, you know, and I've been knocked down a few times perhaps and got up. This music business is, you know, it's up and down, it's peaks and troughs. And I think you have to be quite resilient, quite tenacious. And I've always liked the idea of evolving in creatively. So I've always pursued evolving as an artist, as a musician, as a producer, as a songwriter. And yeah, keeping it moving, really, that's at the forefront of my mind. You know, I've had many sort of moments in my career where I could say, in a worldly sense, you know, okay, that might have been a peak or a pinnacle. But I think I've always tried to sort of keep some kind of grounding and I suppose humility, if I can, in what I do, because I think it sort of encourages learning. And I've always been a student of music, really. I think I will be for the rest of my life. And that's the pursuit for me and the thing I suppose I'm most proud of. Yeah.
And so if you think then, if you reframe that question in a way as learning, like if you think about sort of key things that you feel you've evolved into or learned over this journey, are there any key things that stick out that you can name?
Yeah, I think one surprising thing for me is that being creative and being in an environment that's making music, in my case, is full of surprises. And one of the surprises is that often you're in a role that's fulfilling something on a professional level, but really the surprising thing is it's sometimes you're not there for that reason primarily, or that's my feeling anyway, that you're dealing with people at the end of the day and relationships, and I suppose it's remembering that before anything else, and that's been a steep learning curve for me, I would say, over the last 25 years. You know, because as a young person getting into music or something creative, you're thinking about the art primarily and becoming good at what you do, and of course that is part of the goal, but along the way you realise that it's more than that, and it becomes about relationships. And in my case, I feel like I've sort of evolved into a leader. I feel like I was a follower, really, initially, and spent time thinking about being a good follower. In my case, a follower of excellence or the art of making music. And yeah, that was always at the forefront, but it sort of became something of encouraging others to do the same or to cooperate to make a greater good, you know.
I mean, I think, Troy, the reason you're here, I mean, there's lots of musicians we potentially could have on if we knew them, but we've got you on here because you've got this reputation in the music industry amongst people we know for your sort of almost sort of a parenthood model that you've looked after artists over the years. People want to work with you, and from what I understand from people in the arts, a lot of it is about people who want to work with certain people, and that's not just because of their technical gift, but also because of the sort of primarily because of the sort of person they are. And you said, you know, if you described it really well, the leader journey, which has gone from being, you know, you're technical, an amazing drummer. I've heard you playing, and I mean, it's off the charts. You were Amy Winehouse's drummer, and you know, as a percussion artist, there was probably very few people who get to where you are. But then you've also transitioned into being a producer. You've written and arranged music. You're writing songs. Giant, I think, was the song that won you an Ivor Novello for the most played song. And you've got all these different iterations of leading in the sphere, but underpinning that is what you're describing, which is, you know, kind of taking care of leaders, I guess, and enabling other people's gift. If you think about the environment as a whole, what do you think is particularly challenging for leaders to thrive in your industry, in music? What are the sort of forces at play? And when you describe yourself in sort of in taking care of people, what do you feel that the creative industry particularly needs in terms of care? What have you noticed over the years?
Well, there's a lot in that question. Yeah, so again, I think it's sort of realising that people matter more than the thing you're striving for often. Having said that, you know, you hopefully all have one goal,
Yeah.
you know, and whatever situation you're in as a leader. I think it depends on the context and the sort of people you're dealing with. A good starting point for me, I always quote the great Quincy Jones, who said, you know, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as hard as we speak. So I've tried to make that my motto, in a way. I sometimes like to take it one step further and say, we've got 2 eyes and 1 nose. And basically, I think in terms of enabling people to be creative and helping them, which is something I'm passionate about, they want to know that they're being seen, you know, and not being judged, you know, not sniffing around them or turning your nose up
Looking down
at
the
them.
nose at them, yeah.
Yeah. So that's something that I have loved to do over the years. And I've found that, that there's an immense joy in enabling people in a safe way and with integrity and in a wholesome way, hopefully. And you know, because it's quite hard for creatives. I think we were talking about it earlier, that, you know, it's chaotic, and but at the same time, the pieces do need to be strung together. So I often find myself in a role of helping with a vision of something, or helping an artist with their dreams. And that's not without its challenges. You know, I've been blessed the last few years to work with the great Diana Ross, you know, who's twice my age, for a very different culture, has a sort of lifetime of legacy and creating amazing music and hits over the years, spanning different genres. And, you know, first conversation I had with her, I was out in LA working with Gregory Porter at the Grammys. And the record company called me and said, Diana Ross is going to call you in an hour. Be by your phone. And sure enough, an hour later, she calls. And the first thing she said to me, she said, I've heard a lot about you. She said, I need somebody who can do everything. And I laughed. And she laughed. And I said, well, you know, I'm a jack of all trades. She said, yeah, my mother used to say that to me. And anyway, we met the next day. And we talked about life and music for 3 hours in a studio. But I'd written these songs for her because I knew was doing an album. And so I was pitching these 3 songs. One of the songs was called No Regrets. And we sat and listened to the song, and she looked at me and she said, who's this song about? And it suddenly dawned on me, it's like, okay, don't presume that you know somebody, don't presume that you know me, you know. Okay. Don't be presumptuous. Yeah. Lesson learned there. But she had very much had this thing of, because she obviously needed help, she asked me to produce the album in the end. And so there's somebody who has this lifetime of making music, an absolute legend. She needs help. But she very much has this thing of, tell me what to do, but don't tell me what to do. Okay. And so I often find myself straddling this line between, you know, offering up suggestions quite assertively and also helping with a vision, saying this is what this should be. But somehow in a meek and humble way that makes the artist feel empowered somehow.
Yeah. That's a really difficult balance, isn't it, to hold together?
A couple of the things you've said that really struck me and resonate with me are, so I notice quite often when I'm doing coaching with more senior leaders or people sort of maturing in their leadership, that when leaders start out, they often feel like they need to perform, they need to impress, and they need to get it right. And actually, as they mature, we sort of realise, actually, it's not about performing and impressing, it's about serving. And how do we adapt and respond to what's needed? And there's that thing that you're saying about kind of like showing up to do a job, but actually being open to adapting and responding to actually what's needed. And the thing that's needed might be a sort of aside, you know, it might be slightly in a different direction. And also that idea that, and I think this resonates with the creative process, like life is complex and work environments and leadership is often complex. Like there's lots of unknowing and there's lots of ambiguity. And we can think that we want to come in and give people confidence by knowing all the answers, but often it's about, like you say, listening to people and creating the conditions in which actually people feel more confident to confront that ambiguity or to confront the things that they don't know, rather than feeling like you kind of coming in and wrapping things up.
Yes. I think sometimes, yes, you do have to throw your preconceptions out of the window. I also have a sense of, I'm a big fan of learning things and then choosing to forget them. You know, I think that's sort of, that's part of what mastering an instrument is, you know, for instance, you know.
Yeah, so you're not even conscious of what you're playing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then it becomes second nature, like walking. You don't think about walking, you know. You're thinking about where you're walking or why.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Do you want to say a bit about your relationship with Emily Sunday? I'm just one thing I noticed watching some of your performances with her. You directing orchestra alongside her. I think was one of the things I watched. Her career was developing at the time which you got involved with her. She seemed to really flourish, or there seemed to be a great partnership between you. And I thought that was one example of kind of your work in someone whose career wasn't at the time, was obviously elevated hugely now, but just the kind of chemistry. How do you create great chemistry with creatives? I think that's a question a lot of people are asking, but I really felt that sort of observing in some of those settings.
Yes, I think again it comes down to being interested in the person more than what they do. You know, I think, and to be genuine about it, and also to be, as you said, not coming in as a professional and I've got to nail this and I've got to act a certain way or be at the top of your game and prove that you're at the top of your game, sort of thing. Whereas just be more sort of, I suppose, genuine and real and, true to acknowledge the mistakes you've made, perhaps, and show a bit of vulnerability, because that can be very disarming.
Yeah,
I think. I think if you're in a leadership role, it's very tempting to put on a front, especially in a corporate setting. I'll say a bit about that in a minute, because I think I like to play with that a little bit sometimes when there's a lot of people in front of you.
Yeah.
Being vulnerable, but certainly on a personal level, if I'm in a room with Emily.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, her real name is not Emily.
Okay.
Her real name is Adele.
Okay.
Not many people know that. But the first conversation was, and I knew this, and first conversation was, can I call you Adele?
Oh, really?
And so that's how we started.
Yeah.
And also, at the time, my recording studio has always been at home, because I want people to see the environment I live in, the sort of life I lead, and, which I try to do with integrity. And of course, we all make mistakes, but, and I think she was struck by that, perhaps. Once or twice we'd finish sessions and she'd be walking through the house and the kids were there sort of making a mess or something at the time. And on a couple of occasions I said, can we pray for you? Or can the kids pray for you? Which I think is quite disarming. We don't do it to disarm, but it's like, I love people doing that for me,
Yeah.
I think it's sort of placing an importance on, our hearts and our souls and our intentions, rather than the thing that we're trying to do, or the thing that we're trying to attain, or something like that.
Yeah, expressing value for the whole person that enables creativity to be just one part of that you're trying to nurture and encourage.
That's a brilliant way of putting it.
Joey, I want to come back to you. You said, when we mentioned corporate setting, or the kind of, that scenario of struggle in the corporate music, and I kind of, again, I've seen you, in a sense, your success, is in a sense very public, certainly the tendrils of it are, and there's a corporate music industry out there for whom you're a kind of waymaker for a lot of different things. But at the same time, there are struggles within that corporate world where people aren't cared for. And obviously recently we've seen some really sad news about artists who haven't maybe been cared for as they might have been post their career or in the latter stage of their career, and I guess the mental health impact of that and the pressure that many artists are under. Do you want to say a bit more about what you've observed and how we can lead better?
Yes. I mean, what I understand from the corporate world, as far as music's concerned, by corporate I mean, you know, if you're working with lots of people at the same time, or, you know, you've got lots of people striving for a common goal. That's the way I see it in music. And yeah, it's a big subject, but I like the idea of being vulnerable in that environment, because it makes a mass of people suddenly sort of zone in. Either zone in on you, or hopefully much better, zone in on the purpose, you know, the common goal.
Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Yeah, so for instance, recently I produced a concert for Cypress Hill, and it involved the London Symphony Orchestra. So there was probably about 100 performers on stage, and it was at the Royal Albert Hall, and it was being filmed. So there was a lot of pressure on the gig. I think in that instance, the challenge was the clash of worlds. So you had these amazing, iconic hip-hop artists performing with one of the best classical orchestras in the world, and two very different disciplines, and sort of trying to bridge that gap really, and help these two entities work with each other, help them enjoy working with each other, you know, in an organised and safe way. By safe, I mean we all feel like we trust each other on stage when we're in front of.
And so you were saying about kind of being vulnerable in a way that unlocks something for that. Did you have a go at that in that context?
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite easy for me really, Will, in the sense that I'm not Ashkenazi or sort of Colin Davis, you know. So if I'm going into that environment as a conductor, you know, I'm there to sort of help the thing along, really, and for us to enjoy what we're doing. You know, so I've always found sort of humour helps, you know, especially if it's sort of self-deprecating, and sort of just taking the sting out of, okay, this feels like this is super important and we're all very nervous, kind of thing. Because that is a factor when doesn't matter how long you've been doing it, that there's a certain amount of anxiety, especially if it's something new like this Cypress Hill London Symphony Orchestra. So I found, yeah, a little bit of humour. In my case, it's usually sort of dad jokes, but whatever it takes to kind of take the edge off or break the ice. I often find just literally being vulnerable myself. So if I make mistakes, kind of make it okay that I've made a mistake and be honest about it in front of lots of people.
1,000 people. That's quite hard, right?
Yeah, because it makes them feel like, okay, there's a human being in front of us.
Yeah.
And in a sort of counterintuitive way, they feel like they trust you more because, okay, this person really wants this to be good, but he's also has his own struggles with it, you know.
And I guess part of what also makes that safe, and what I imagine really helps creativity to flourish is that if you're taking responsibility for your own mistakes, you're not blaming or blame shifting onto others. So actually, if people can witness, oh, he makes a mistake and he takes ownership of that himself, then that makes it much freer and easier to sit on this chair and to bring my best.
It does, and sometimes I quite enjoy, and it sounds strange, but I quite enjoy taking the hit for things in those kind of environments, because it can really diffuse situations. If somebody makes a mistake on stage, you know, and you take responsibility for it as a leader, and that may not necessarily mean an apology in that time, but it might be, you know, put the burden onto you, and then they feel okay about it. They don't feel condemned, and also everybody else thinks, okay, this guy wants to be moving forward, you know, efficiently and not. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
It makes a smooth operation, really.
It's also, you're talking about sort of redemptive leadership, where you're, as a leader, taking responsibility to enable other people and protect them from humiliation. I think that's what's really powerful about what you're describing, Troy. And maybe that's what looks different to what we understand the kind of corporate business end, where people make mistakes, and it's like we want to kind of disown the people who make mistakes. Whereas you're describing as, I want to take responsibility for the mistakes you make, so you can continue to shine in the environment, which I think is a beautiful way of leading. We're coming to a close. I feel like will you come back? I feel like it's a conversation that I'd love to continue. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like
we're just getting
started. There's so many more questions I really want to ask you. I guess I would just want to say to you, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate what you bring, and I particularly appreciate your humility. I mean, I hugely, as you know, admire your career and your gifting, but most of all, I really admire the way you hold yourself and your care of other people. So just so grateful, and I hope we can get you back, because I want to ask more questions about what comes next. So thank you.
I'd love
so much. Thanks
Glad
so
to.
much, Troy. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Will and Will.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us on this really intriguing and interesting edition, I think, of the Good Leader podcast. And we've been blessed to hear, and I hope we're going to get Troy to come back again so we can talk more about creativity and leadership. I'm Will van der Hart.
I'm Will James.
And so until next time, have a really great day. It's been great being with you, and we hope to see you soon on a soon edition.